Let's look at the scriptures together and let's read from Philippians chapter 2 together, starting verse 12. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. And then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor in vain. But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. All right, well done. Have a seat. We are going to be teaching this passage starting with verse 14, where it says, do everything without grumbling or arguing. But I want you to have the fuller context of it. This passage suggests that you will shine like stars. I'm going to give you an opportunity to think about how God may be calling you to shine. Ryan and Jody shined. Ryan came to faith in high school through Young Life. And he had come out of a pretty challenging background, but that's where God was made real to him. And when he got to college, he wanted to be able to extend the same kind of experience to others that he had experienced. So he called up the local Young Life office in Delaware County, and they got together and they sat down and they said, all right, let's go to Upper Darby High School. If you're not local, which is rare, but if you're not local, you'll know that Upper Darby High School has almost 4,000 students, 55 different nationalities, and every single socioeconomic background, but there was not Young Life there. But that's the kind of situation that Ryan wanted to get himself into. So he and some other friends connected to Young Life started extending themselves to kids, and they saw a Young Life club form, and they had camp, and they started seeing kids come together and come to faith. Those kids, along the way, introduced Ryan to Jody, who was their guidance counselor. They fell in love, and they got married. And along the way, as they were seeing what God had done among these Young Life students, they noticed this theme. Almost all of their last names were somewhere between A and G on the alphabet. What was that about? It just turns out that Jody was a guidance counselor for the kids at that school, whose last names fell between the letters A and G. And she made it her practice to pray through the list of her names every single day. Ryan shined because he's the kind of guy who's going to go right into Upper Darby High School and start a club for Jesus. He's that kind of guy who's going to shine that way. Jody shined in her own way by praying for these students. And the lives of these kids are forever different because of the way they shine. Different people shine different ways. We have folks in our church who've seen God do an amazing work in their marriage, and they now help other people with their marriages. We have folks who have found recovery from addiction, and now they sponsor other people through the 12 steps when it comes to addiction. We have folks in our church who prayed regularly when they were in college. They prayed every single day for their friends, and they saw their college fellowship double. They saw kids come to Christ in droves. People shine in different ways. How about you? How do you shine? How will you shine? This passage is a very directive passage. Sometimes we're teaching the stories of Scripture and we're drawing out the principles in the stories. Sometimes they're often theological metaphors and we're trying to unpack them. This one, we're just kind of holding on. because Paul is very directive and saying, all right, Christians, do this. If we want to summarize this passage, if you're a Christian, you don't complain. And if you're a Christian and you'll be a Christian, you're going to shine. All right? All right, so let's jump into it. If we're going to shine, here's the basic point. If we're going to shine, there's going to be at least 3 decisions we're going to make along the way that I believe that this passage teaches us about how to do that. The first decision is this: making the decision to ruthlessly rid your life of complaining. Ruthlessly rid your life of complaining. The passage says, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Now, has anybody ever accused you of grumbling? Have you guys ever even used the word grumbling? Like, I grumble, I'll be honest, but like mostly it sounds like complaining, right? What Paul is using is he's using a Bible word here. It's a Bible word that refers to the Israelites when they came out of Egypt. If you remember, it was sort of a shocking story that these people who had been in slavery saw God do a miraculous thing, multiple signs and wonders in the face of Pharaoh, literally leads them through the Red Sea. They get into the desert, and after seeing all these miracles, they're like, what, did you just lead us out here to starve us to death in the desert? And they grumbled against Moses, and they grumbled against Yahweh. And it got weird because they were grumbling so much that they started saying, you remember what it was like when we were in Egypt? All of us, we just sat around pots of meat. We had fresh vegetables all the time. That wasn't true at all. But in slavery culture, they were enslaved, and so a culture formed that they were likely complaining all the time, right? And so passing through the Red Sea didn't change their complaining culture. They were just, meet the new boss, and let's complain about him. And they lost the opportunity to go into the promised land themselves because this complaining culture could not see the opportunity in front of them. Now, this isn't just a thing back there. I think a lot of us swim in complaining cultures. For some of you, 80% of the communication you experienced growing up was just simple complaining. Maybe where you work, or certainly maybe it's the lunch table, the kids you hang out with. The way you bond with one another is who can complain the loudest. The Israelites had this thing where they looked back at the past and they made it better than what it used to be. You hear people talk about that where, like, if you see an old high school friend and they'll start talking about, remember how awesome it was? And you're like, I don't remember it that way. I don't think it was that great. But what happens, like one artist says, you glorify the past when the future dries up. Here's why it's so dangerous, is that complaining is self-deception. It's telling yourself lies. And for the Christian, we believe that 1 Peter 1:3, a simple promise that his divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness. If that is true, in very plain terms, what are you complaining about? Complaining tells a story about who God is that isn't true. It tells a story about who you are that isn't true. And it becomes destructive to your relationships as well. Because complaining is a contagion. It becomes contagious, right? Because it becomes that lowest common denominator that everybody relates to one another with, right? And we have a really good culture here. I'm grateful. We have a low complaint quotient, right? But think about your different relationships. Think about the different groups of people you hang out with, right? What's the complaint quotient, right? When I was in school, it'd be like we'd find a way to complain about the teacher, or you find a way to complain about the coach, and then as you complain about the boss, or you complain about the culture, or whatever. If you're watching March Madness, one of the things I like about March Madness, I don't like the fact that my team lost by 30 last night, and I lost my chance to win the bracket. But aside from that, it's college basketball players just complain less. And I like that. And it's important because every referee knows that losing teams complain more. It's always true. And referees know that the losing team is just going to complain more. But the corollary is also true, that complaining teams lose more. As a coach, one of the things I have to get into the heads of my kids is don't think about the referees. I'll think about the referees for you. Because as soon as the players begin thinking about the referees, they are no longer learning and adapting to the game that they are in. They are no longer reading their opponent. They're no longer reading the game. They're playing against the wrong opponent. Why? Because they're thinking about, or at least spending some of their energy thinking about the referees, right? And the other thing that happens is if a coach allows the players to complain about the referees, what happens to the team is a can't-do attitude spills into the minds of the players, right? Well, the one thing that coach wants to get into the heads of every single player on the front end is we can do this, right? Well, once you start complaining about the referees, you put this victim idea into the heads of the players, right? And then all of a sudden, can't-doism starts dripping in, right? And not only are they not paying attention to the game for what it is, they lose their confidence that they can actually do something about it in the first place. And that's and it might not be a big deal, but that's the 10 to 20%. That's the difference between winning or losing. I don't think it would have helped Gonzaga last night when they lost by 28 points. But in a competitive game, that matters. In a real relationship, in your home, it really matters. If people are constantly going through life with a can't-do attitude, you know what won't happen? They won't do. It won't happen. And if there's a constant flow of negativity, we stop responding to one another and just start fearing and playing the victim. So, what does it mean to rid your life of complaining? First of all, it means stop complaining. And part of what you need to start thinking about here is all of us need support. And we need to learn that line. We all need to look to others for support, and most of us need to do that more than we currently are doing. But there's a line that you cross between, hey, you know what, I'm really struggling with this thing, and, well, that person sucks, all right? So now, I might have jumped across that line, but oftentimes we don't jump across that line. We just sort of creep across of it. But what can happen in a relationship is once you've creeped across it, you never go back. And all that happens in that conversation is not support giving, it's just complaining, right? And when you're complaining, you're not actually wanting a solution. You're actually just asking for pity. You're not wanting things to be better. You just want to be seen and known in that rough situation. I had the other part of stopping complaining is acknowledge God's presence in whatever we're struggling with. I had it was just really embarrassing. Let's just put it this way. I had a really embarrassing situation. My kid was playing basketball, and the technology when it comes to admission and tickets out there just has not caught up to schools or whatever. And I spent about 10 minutes and a lot of money buying tickets one time, and sometimes I don't have a filter, and I just said, this is ridiculous. Right next to the athletic director of the school. And right in front of a couple of parents who were just volunteering to take my money. And I really, it just kind of came out of yes, it was in my thought, but I was just complaining. And I came back and I apologized, like, hey, I know, we're all trying here, you know. But there was this complaining spirit. I don't know, I want to pay the money. I was being cheap. I didn't really want to deal with the technology. I just wanted to give them cash. Whatever it might have been, whatever was going on, I thought of it different once what was in my heart came out of my mouth in the presence of someone else. When it comes to your complaining, well, what if God is with you? How would that change the way you would invest your thoughts and your words? So we have to stop complaining, and we have to stop listening to complainers. We just need to understand, we live in a world where there's entire media empires that make their money off of complaining and getting people to complain. Wall Street does very well with complaining Americans. It's deeply embedded into the systems around us. We got to resist that. There are people that'll just sit down and listen to hours of complaining. They'll put their earbuds and turn on their favorite complaining podcaster, and you wonder why they're not happy. You wonder why they're disappointed. And I come back to this oftentimes with Christians because I actually believe one of the fundamental things that keeps the church from fulfilling its purpose of bringing light and hope and kindness and goodness to the world is complaining Christians, particularly in the media world. It's the first thing that keeps us from fulfilling our purpose. We're called to love the world, not complain about it. I don't understand a Christian complaining about non-Christians acting like Christians, that don't act like Christians. Why would you expect them to? And you complaining about them isn't going to change anything. We have to stop listening to complainers. And at times we need to interrupt complainers. Sometimes it's just too much. And we lovingly serve them by... Sometimes people just need to be listened to, and you just got to let them finish it out. But only listening to them does them no favors. You need to acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the disappointment, but sometimes you have to ask them questions like, do you think God is in this? If they're a Christian, you can ask them if God is in this. Or asking them questions that help them activate their agency. What can you do? Is there a way somebody or I could assist you? Because I think deep down in the complaints, people have come across the line feeling I'm a victim and I'm only a victim. And they want somebody to rescue them. And at the heart of things, that's not what God does. He releases us with dignity to be the heroes in our own story with His help. And a shift in approach can really begin changing the way we think. If you could reduce the complaining quotient in your mind, in your relationships, and in your heart, what's going to start opening up is you're going to realize that you can be different and you don't have to be like everyone else in the world, which brings us to decision number 2. The decision number 2 that this passage offers us is a challenge to decide to not just fit into our generation. Paul literally is going to take a quote from the book of Deuteronomy way in the back, in the early pages, I should say, of the Old Testament. He says, if you can not be complaining or arguing, you can be blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. See, in the Old Testament, they thought about the generations a lot, right? Because it was the number one responsibility of each generation to get to the faith to the next generation. And that's still true of us. Your number one responsibility in your faith is to get the faith to the next generation. Whether you have kids or not, that's something that each of us must bear if we are Christians. But in the Old Testament, in those days, and I think it's to this day as well, the number one temptation for each generation is to be just like the nations around them. And God continued to give them ways to not be like the rest of the nations. Like, you don't have to work 7 days a week. Just take a Sabbath. Just do 6 days. Rest, and I'll take care of you. You don't have to have a bazillion gods that you're going to have constantly satisfied. I've already chosen you. Just come, worship, and honor me. but they continue to just get distracted by what everyone else was doing. Just like Andy said, they lived their lives like this. What are they doing over there? You could choose to make a decision to not complain, but if you choose to allow your peers to shape your life, you lose your ability to have impact. Each generation was a big deal throughout, particularly the Old Testament. And it started to become a big deal around here around 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when all of a sudden, the World War II generation came home and had an enormous amount of children, right? And they named that generation the baby boom generation. And then everybody stopped having generation, and my generation, the baby busters, formed, right? And so all of a sudden they started realizing the difference between the builders and the boomers and Gen X. And I think that's actually, or busters, we call ourselves Gen X because we're not just reacting to the boomers. Anyway, but think about it. How different are you than your peers? How willing to be different are you than your peers? Boomers, we're grateful for you. You are the true first idealists. You really believe that you can change the world. You did change the world. Thank you for the civil rights movement. Thank you for Motown. Thank you for an enormous amount of really helpful changes when it comes to justice. We still hold the 70s against you, all right? But we thank you for those things. If you are a boomer, are you just like everybody else? Remember that the boomers who changed the world in the 60s were also called the me generation of the 80s. Is that true of you? Are you willing to be different? The passage talks about each generation is warped and crooked. It means that some of the ways we systematically think as a generation just aren't necessarily right. Are you different from your peers? And I'm just not just saying like folks outside the faith. Are you even different than some of your Christian peers? Gen X. We're the adaptable generation. We cooked our own dinners, right? And even though the generations below us don't think we exist, they just call us boomers, we know who we are, right? We're adaptable. We pulled things together. But we're also the busiest generation maybe the world has ever seen. If you are a Gen Xer right now, it's very likely that you are busier than any human has ever been busy. Are you okay with that? Are you going to be just like everybody else? If you're a Gen Xer, are you going to parent just like everyone else? How's that going for them? When they talk about how kids are doing, are you going to parent just like every other parent? Are you going to be like everybody else? Does everybody else have it right? Millennials. You made optimism cool again. Thank you. My generation just got cynical. Why? Because we had to follow the freaking boomers, all right? So millennials, thank you for bringing back optimism. Thank you for your idealism. There's way more of you, so that's really good. It's good to have more people. We're glad for that. Are you going to be just like every other millennial? All right? We love all your cool niches and the things you're into. That's really awesome. We think Netflix and chill is interesting, right? All right, but are you going to be like everybody else in your generation? Will you allow your life to be, I know you're all going to be successful. Why? Because you're optimists, right? Will you choose significance? Most of you are at a phase in life where you get to choose, am I going to follow the road that everybody else followed, that success road? Or you make decisions around significance? Will you allow your life to be ordinary long enough for it to become significant? And Gen Z, don't believe the hype. We like you, all right? Don't believe what everyone says about you. We like you, and we believe in you. And yes, years 18 through 25 are going to be hard for you. They're hard for everybody. But here's something that you guys are finding your voice, and here's what is being said about you. When faith becomes real to you, you bring peace to an anxious world. When faith becomes real to you, you bring harmony to a divided world. When faith becomes real to you, you don't speed up thinking that you need to rush around and get everything done. You have a certain contentment that the generations before you didn't have. You look at the face of apathy, and you're finding that passion is awakening in you. This is when faith comes. But Gen Z, will you be like everybody else in your own generation? Are you just going to be like everyone else? Scriptures say you're to shine. You're to shine. A light, when it shines in the darkness. God's the light of the world. We don't have to shine everywhere, but every single one of us is placed somewhere in a particular group of people, in a particular moment, in a particular place where we work, we go to school, whatever we might do. Do you shine there, or are you going to be like everybody else there? From the beginning, I think these have been decisions that our church has collectively taken to shine. The third decision is that we need to decide to shine. The city of Philippi, to whom Paul wrote this letter, that church was relatively poor. It was founded by a woman business owner, a healed demoniac, and a retired civil servant. And so they always struggled, but that church continued to flourish and shine in a difficult situation. This passage has a lot of specific, very detailed, pointed things. I just want to pull out a few attributes of churches that shine, because I think we can shine together. First of all, those churches choose to shine together. Any one of us could be a point of light somewhere, but there's something that this world needs when it comes to community. It needs a community of light. Not a scary community of light that shines that light in your eyes. So what are you doing wrong? No, a safe place where you can come and belong and heal and feel like you can belong. Not a whole bunch of people with their own specific passion projects. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's something about a community that loves one another and takes care of one another that this world longs for, that this world is hungry for. The world's not looking for stars. People don't need stars. They need a place where they can feel safe and belong. Churches that shine together. Churches that shine also shine simply. The passage says, you'll be like children of God, pure and blameless. In a cynical world, that's kind of scary, right? Because in a cynical world, the biggest sin is to be naive, right? And everyone's afraid of not seeing through everything, right? And it's cool to deconstruct everything, right? We can deconstruct the deconstructors. But children of God, they don't give themselves over to cynicism. Not simplicity, but there's a simplicity on the other side of complexity. And the strongest faith I've seen, as it matures, grows that person younger. Not naive or foolish, but more optimistic, more hopeful, more hungry for what God might give us, with greater expectation as to what God might do in any single moment. That's what it means to be blameless and pure. You're not crowded in by the cynicism. You're not crowded in by this, that, the other thing. You're not looking for the next thing to complain. You're not looking to be, you don't have to see every show that everyone's talking about. You have to go to everything that everyone's talking about. You don't have to be controlled by everyone. You're free. And you can be hopeful and expect that we have a good God that's showing up for us. Churches that shine together. They shine simply. They shine in reflection to the Scriptures. He says, you'll shine like lights in this world as you hold on to the word of life. He's talking about the Scriptures. This means that when we have to choose between what we feel like and what's true in Scriptures, we choose the Scriptures. Every single generation, every single culture will find things that are patently obvious to everybody, but God will disagree with. So just know there are things in your culture that all of your friends think are obvious to everyone, but they're not true when it comes to Scriptures. We choose the Scriptures in those moments, even though that might seem ridiculous. We choose the Scriptures. Why? Because did we figure things out? Is our generation really getting it right on every single detail? Is there a culture that's going to do that? Or can we trust the word of life? Can we hold on to it? And then churches that shine, they shine together, they shine simply, they shine as they reflect the truth of the Scriptures, and they shine sacrificially. Paul sacrificed for the Philippians. He talks about, he's like, even if I give my life, my entire life's poured out on the offering, it's going to be worth it. Why? Because you flourish. We are here as a church because people gave sacrificially. Funds were raised so that we can have a church. Other folks came and they served in a variety of ways. And every church that you drive around had a group of people who sacrificed so that the next generation could have a church for them. And as we mature as a church, we already give generously. We're going to continue to find ways to do that. Not so that we can have an awesome church for ourselves, but so that we can see that other generations have new churches for them as well. If every church lives sacrificially. And when you've stopped complaining and when you've stopped listening to what everybody else says out there, it doesn't become complaining. When I've talked to younger single people and they look at me as a father or whatever, and they look at other parents, they're like, man, there's so much sacrifice that parents do all the time. Most of those parents, they're not sacrificing, they're just loving. And that's how it was for Jesus. Yes, he sacrificed his life on the cross, but that's not how he sees it. He just sees it as love. He didn't complain about the world. He didn't try to be like everybody in the world. He came to love it. And that love drew out the sacrifice for the atonement of our sins, to put our past behind us so that we can live forward and free. We do this. We rid ourselves of complaining. We choose to shine together because the world is dark and it needs light. We do it because when Jesus looked to the crowds, he saw them and had compassion. That's why we do this. We're going to celebrate communion in a moment, but let's close this moment of prayer, and then we'll celebrate communion and worship together.